second on this artist. I think some of you have been here for the others. Let me remind everybody to turn your phones off, silence them, and we are at capacity in the room, so I'm gonna, unfortunately, not let anybody else in. Remember that these are also being live cast on YouTube. So it's possible to watch them live, or they are all on YouTube at the email link that Susan sent out yesterday. So you can also, if, I don't need to tell you this because you're here, but if your friends are sad, tell them they can watch them. And I will say I got to watch one yesterday on YouTube, which was lovely, and it's a good way to catch up if you miss it. Okay, I think that's all, and I'll turn it over to the presenters.
We're going to leave the lights on for a minute.
Okay.
Before I start on Eakins, I wanted to tell you that this book about Peel belongs to Libby Brown, and it's really a good book. It's the Philadelphia Museum of Art collection, plus the collection of Robert McNeil, who was the major collector of Peel art for the last really 20 years. And Libby's agreed to leave it in the library for a little while. So if you're interested to look at it, it has great illustration and lots of information. Okay, we found some other Eakins photographs that I wanted to show you. This one I showed you last time. This was Eakins in his backyard, taken by the woman who would soon be his wife, Susan McDowell. And it's a part of Eakins' personality. He always had a kind of transgressive, rebellious streak. And from the time he grew up, he wanted to be a kind of rough character. You can see he's not only in this outfit, but it's also dirty. Probably from artistic activity. But this is part of Eakins that was with him all his life. And the next one. And this is Eakins. There are more photographs of Eakins without clothes than there are with clothes. And during the 1880s especially, he made a whole series of nude photographs. And I say nude now, I was saying naked, but Eakins said nude, so we would say nude. Nude photographs, and this is part of a series of photographs he made for paintings devoted to antique themes. So Eakins is actually playing panpipes. And we found, Susan found, a way to enlarge some of the details of the paintings. And I just wanted to show you a couple of those because they're worth looking at.
The chess set or the china?
I would love the table with the glasses on. Oh, yeah. And remember that the table over on the over on that table. And if you can get me the whole, well, anyway. Remember, this painting is 12 inches wide, and it's part of the academic tradition is making small, detailed, sort of jewel-like paintings, as well as big salon exhibition paintings. And can you move down to can you see the, yeah. This table is a perfect example of Victorian Victorian furniture making. It has every kind of needless detail, and it has, this tiny table is supported by all these carved supports, and it's just, the whole thing is excessive. And Eakins actually, to paint it, he made a perspective drawing of it. Okay, I think.
Enough of that?
I think enough of that.
Now, this is the part where I see them get
Yeah. I just wanted to show you a couple of details about the Gross Clinic. Because it's just the opposite of the chess players. It's a big painting, it's 8 feet tall. It was made for exhibition. And I wanted to show the detail of Dr. Gross's head, which is a kind of masterpiece of painting. And also a rendering of the overhead skylight, which was the only sense of light in the room. And this also shows, better than the other slides, all the individual students looking at the operation. And those are all portraits. I think I told you that. Okay, could I have the next? Let's do the next detail of the hand, the two hands. And a big salon picture always needed a dramatic moment, something to really grab people's attention. And I think this does. And especially Gross's bloody finger, which was really the cause that the painting wasn't allowed to be shown in the art exhibit at the exhibition, but it was put into a field hospital display at the fair. I think if this painting were shown in the salon, it would have been exhibited and maybe won a prize.
Okay.
Yep. Now, the paintings we saw last time were mostly from the 1870s. And there were a lot of them. Eakins exhibited them widely, but not really any of them sold. There was only one series of paintings that were spin-offs from the William Rush carving his allegorical figure, the Schools Guild. They're called the old-fashioned paintings that really sold at all. So then we got into this series of paintings done early in the 1880s. These are shad fishing on the Delaware, which were based on photographs, and really photographs that Eakins had figured out a way to combine in one image. Can I see the photograph? This is one of the series he did of these men dragging in this big net or seine with the shad. And then the next.
That or next?
No, next. And then there's this one, which shows Eakins' family watching the shad fishers. And let's have the next. And then there's the group of family that Eakins took from this photograph and put into the other image. Will you go back? And he did this by projecting the photographs onto the canvas, and then you can't draw around them really, but making a series of marks to register where they would go and what appropriate size they would be. And this is a painting that I showed you a watercolor of last time called The Pathetic Song, with Susan McDowell playing the piano and a friend of Eakins' father playing the cello, and another friend who was singing a sentimental song, not sad deliberately, not pathetic in terms of performance. In 1882, Eakins was named the director of the schools at the academy. He had been working there since really 1876, and advising and helping his teacher. He advised on the building itself, in fact, and made sure there was a dissecting room for the students of art. But the interesting new thing about the curriculum at the academy at that time was that they had male and female students together studying from the nude figure. And this was proudly announced by the board of the Academy. It was not a surprising new feature, but it was certainly unprecedented in the history of academic teaching. The next. In 1883, the head of the Committee on Instruction at the Academy, who was Edward H. Coates, who replaced Fairman Rogers as head of the Committee on Instruction. Coates commissioned Eakins to make a painting that he could show in his house and then give to the Academy. And this is what Eakins made. It's called Swimming, or the Swimming Hole. It's actually a favorite swimming hole near Haverford that people went to. Men, of course, did bathe nude then. And it's an elaborately composed picture, as you see. And some of the figures actually embodied the antique sculpture that they had plasters of in the Academy. And again, Eakins took a lot of photographic studies for this. This is the one in which you can see how disorganized it is compared to the other painting. The people there are not just Eakins students, but also older friends of his. So could we go back? Yeah. And then you have to ask yourself, was this really a good idea to make a painting like this for a private individual to hang in his house? And no, in that Coates actually knew some of these people, and it, I think, represents one aspect of Eakins' personality in that he made this anyway. He didn't think about whether or not it was appropriate. And it sort of continues the proselytizing for nude figures that Eakins started in the William Rush carving his allegorical figure in the Schuylkill River. Down at the lower right is Eakins. There's his setter dog, Harry. And it's a beautifully realized painted in detail. Big, actually. But still, Coates decided he didn't want that. And he decided on the pathetic song instead. Next, please. Eakins in the 1880s, mid-1880s, was introduced to Walt Whitman and went to Whitman's house in Camden and took some beautiful photographs of him very late in his life. This was 1891. And they really capture Whitman when he wasn't on, in a sense. He wasn't being his personality. And they're beautiful, thoughtful paintings. And he also did a painting of Whitman, which is probably the only time that Eakins ever flattered anyone in a picture. And Whitman, of course, really liked it. And they apparently hit it off. I have a quote that I want to, give you. And Eakins was one of Whitman's 26 pallbearers at his funeral. But let's see, a few years later, Sadakichi Hartman, who was a critic and writer at the time, dedicated a book about Whitman to Eakins. And the dedication is dedicated to Thomas Eakins of Philadelphia as an admirer of Whitman in his own native independence, simplicity, and force, without crankiness or subserviency. And this is really the beginning of Eakins' reputation as an artist and as a person that will continue through his life. Next. But Eakins was fired from the Academy in 1886 because he removed a loincloth from a male model in a mixed class of male and female students. This caused an uproar, of course, but, and it was also part of a conspiracy that three of the students of the academy, one of which was his brother-in-law, really got together to assassinate Eakins' character. It was very hard. There's a lot of correspondence in the academy files from Eakins answering each of these charges, which are just very, very disturbing. And Eakins himself became very depressed after this for several years and didn't paint very much. But in 1866, he went out to the South Dakota, pardon me, because one of his doctors owned a ranch out there, and he went there for rest and recreation. Pardon me. And he loved it and wrote some really very good letters back home about his experience out there. This is the big painting that he made. Called Cowboys in the Badlands. And it shows you the kind of very rugged, almost surreal aspect of the Badlands landscape. It was a very rough country. It's still called the uninhabited zone in South Dakota. And it, for a moment, had a boom in raising cattle that were then shipped off to New York. But it didn't last because the country is really too cold and too rough to sustain cattle raising for any length of time. And while he was there, Eakins made some studies for painting. This, for example, a lot of these, and also took like wonderful photographs. I'm sorry, no. Right. I'm sorry I couldn't get more photographs, find more of the photographs, because they're a wonderful series. And you'll notice the dog features prominently in both of the pictures. And this is a man who was actually a cattle rustler who was waiting to be picked up by federal agents. He still has his gun, but they took away his bullets, and out there was simply no place for him to go when he wouldn't be tracked down. And he's actually holding his bridle, as you see there. And then when Eakins came back, he made some beautiful studio photographs using the props that he brought back from South Dakota. Do you have enlightenment on this one? This belongs to the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and it's a wonderfully detailed painting. And
Start at the top of the bottom.
I'll start at the top, but our museum conservator at the time said that the whole painting was focused on the little finger on the guitar, and that all the rest of the painting spiraled out around it. And these paintings were popular, and again were some of the few that Eakins sold during his lifetime. Okay, cool. Oh. This is a portrait of Eakins' wife, Susan McDowell Eakins, who had been a student of his at the academy, but had known him from time before that. Her father was an engraver, and so they had known each other through the connection of the two parents, Eakins' father being a writing master. And this was painted in Eakins' studio when they were married and living in the studio for years before they moved to the Mount Vernon house. It's actually, well, It's an unflattering picture, partly, mostly, I think, because of the skylight that shadows her eyes. And it's intended really as a kind of satire on stylish portraiture at the time. Susan was fully in accord with Eakins' beliefs about art. And so she's dressed up in this sort of empire dress, a fancy silk that she would never wear in her own. She has artistic red stockings. She's holding a book of Japanese prints, who are very fashionable at this moment, and surrounded by old furniture and a sculpture by Eakins on the right, a relief sculpture, and maybe a painting by her and another painting by him. And then, of course, there's Harry. The painting was actually named for exhibition, The Artist's Wife and His Setter Dog. So it's actually a portrait of Harry, too. And he's a great big hairy presence in the middle of what is ordinarily would be an aesthetic scene. Let me show you this. To make a comparison, this painting was made just a couple of years before The Artist's Wife and His Setter Dog, and I think probably it was even made, that painting may have even been a reaction to this. This is by William Merritt Chase, who was one of Eakins' major competitors. He was the polar opposite of Eakins in that he saw himself as a dandy, and he made his studio into a kind of aesthetic experience in itself. But you'll see that the model, who's in, again, a kind of old-fashioned 1820s dress, is looking at a book of probably engravings, and is surrounded by all these rich silks and brass and old antique bits and all sorts of stuff that Eakins would never have anything to do with. He said, Chase's studio is an atelier, mine is a workshop. Okay. Yeah. And at this time, too, Eakins was commissioned to do his other big medical painting. This is Dr. William Hayes Agnew. It was commissioned by his students at Penn to celebrate his retirement. Time has changed, time has passed, as you see. They've discovered antiseptic procedures. And again, all of the figures in the background are portraits of the students. And Eakins is over there in the corner being whispered to by one of the doctors. It was painted in 3 months, so you can imagine how much work it was and how much planning there had to be into going into organizing all these people to come and sit for Eakins. I also like this guy over here who's not really watching. Next. But after really being fired from the Academy, Eakins mostly painted portraits of friends of his, or people he admired. This is a woman named Letitia Wilson Jordan, who Eakins saw at a party. She was the sister of a friend, and asked to paint her portrait. And I think it's a fascinating portrait because on her expression, she doesn't look like she's exactly ready to go to this party. Not sure she wanted to go. And she's kind of armored with all these accessories, her bow, huge gloves. She's carrying a big fan and a little wrap here. So it's interesting. It's easy to get lost in all the details. But if you compare this portrait to another one, this is Madame X by Sargent, a couple of years before, which is now the subject of a show at the Metropolitan Museum. You can see, well, a contemporary critic about Madame X said that she dyes her hair, she paints her ears rouge, and she paints her body white. So this is what I think Sargent liked was this is a complete self-presentation. There's absolutely nothing left to chance. And could we go back? And if you look at this picture, it's entirely the opposite. It's not a complete self-presentation. I think and I think that's what Eakins liked. This whole personality expressed in these objects. Okay. And this is a young woman who's, again, a friend of the family. Her name is Maud Cook. And I think, again, she is probably a figure that Eakins considered to be a really beautiful girl. Next. This is Eakins' portrait of Henry Tanner, the black artist who was a student of his at the Academy and went to Paris and lived in Paris most of his life. This is a beautifully painted picture, but Eakins has made Tanner look very worried, carefully, even though his life was really going very well in Paris. Yes. And this is the thinker. Eakins painted, he was briefly Eakins' brother-in-law. He was married to Susan's sister. And this epitomizes really the kind of introspective, thoughtful portrait that Eakins was making at the time. It's very tall. It's beautifully made. People admired it very much. And there's absolutely no market for it. Eakins simply was not selling these paintings. And this disturbed him. I mean, he showed his paintings widely. He was winning prizes at exhibitions. He was called on to be a juror at various jury shows. But his paintings simply were not selling. The Academy in 1902 gave him a medal, a gold medal, presented by Edward H. Coates, the man who had fired him years before. And one of the few quotations of Eakins' actual speech is the comment he made when Coates gave him the medal. And I think it's a great example of Eakins' style, in a sense. He said, "I think you've got a heap of impudence to give me a medal." And then he pedaled off to the United States Mint and traded it in for money. What was selling in the 1890s were William Chase, who had become an impressionist. As you see, this is a painting of his family at Shinnecock. And Chase was always a dandy, and he always was maintaining his public image, and he had to work very hard for it. So he ran a summer art colony at Shinnecock all during the rest of his life. Next, please. And then the other artist who was popular at the time was Winslow Homer. This is a painting at the museum called Huntsmen and Dogs. And it represents the kind of painting that wealthy industrialists did buy for their houses. As you see, it represents a hunter, probably a guide with the skin of a deer, and standing in a landscape surrounded by his two barking dogs. So you have this desolate autumn landscape, very quiet, with the dogs barking around. And then as you look at the landscape, you realize it's a ruined landscape because the trees have been cut down. And if you look in the back, you'll see that it's been burned in various parts of the forest. So it's not exactly a happy painting, but it's a very beautiful, and they probably would have said virile painting, actually made when Homer went to one of the Adirondack camps for fancy camp for rich men that he went to in his later years. And then, since Eakins painted so many portraits, I didn't want to show you too many, but I thought I'd show you the big ones. He painted this portrait, which is Frank Hamilton Cushing, who was an ethnologist at the University of Pennsylvania, who lived with the Zuni Indians in New Mexico for 7 years and really learned more about the Zuni than they wanted to be known. I went to the Zuni Museum a few years ago, and there was a sort of disclaimer put up in the museum saying, well, don't believe everything that Frank Hamilton Cushing tells you, because it may not be true. But it really shows Cushing really after his life in the desert in New Mexico. He got smallpox, among other things, and became ill and remained ill for the rest of his life. And then he's surrounded with the various examples of the things that he brought back from the West. He and Eakins became great friends. I think they probably shared a kind of likeness for the liking for the roughness of the landscape and the people. This is Professor Harry Rowland, who was a physicist at Johns Hopkins, but and it's not a good photograph, but I wanted to show it to you because Eakins also made frames for his paintings. And Rowland was a physicist. He's holding a little iridescent, what's the word?
Sorry.
Spectrum. That he figured out how to make one by using very finely engraved lines. But the thing is, Eakins made this painting and then surrounded it with this frame, which has all sorts of mathematical symbols around it, indicating what Rowland actually did. And I forgot to mention that, we haven't seen it yet. Maybe we didn't see it.
What's in the right corner? Is that a piece of
Over here? I don't know what that is. Anyone tell what that is? We're all to the side here. Oh, okay. Next. Mm-hmm. And this is, again, a large painting of Cardinal Martinelli, who was one of a series of clerical paintings that Eakins made. Eakins was friends with a young artist named Samuel Murray, who was a Catholic. And they went out to St. Charles Borromeo and had dinner with the priests. And Eakins had painted a whole series of clerical subjects of all kinds. Elaborate ones like this one, and then very simple head portraits of people that he liked. Okay. And then we finally come to one of my favorite paintings. This painting is as big as the Gross Clinic, and it's called Mrs. William D. Frischmuth. Mrs. Frischmuth collected musical instruments, as you see around her, and Eakins probably made a detailed perspective drawing to group all of the instruments exactly. She didn't like this portrait, but it hung with her collection of musical instruments that she gave to Penn all the time that the collection was there. And what I really enjoy is the idea of Mrs. Frischmuth, a stolid figure, and her weighty hand plinking a note on the piano, spin it probably. And then all of these exotic instruments around her, and thinking of the sounds that they would make as surrounding this large, solemn figure. I think it's really a great painting. It's at the museum too. Okay. And then toward the end of the 1890s, Eakins took up another athletic subject. It was boxing, which was again a popular sport like rowing at the time. There were several arenas around the city that had various really boxing matches 3 or 4 times a week, and they were reported in the paper. Eakins made friends with a boxer named Billy Smith, who's shown here. This painting is called Between Rounds. It is, again, if you can't really see it well, but the most detailed thing in the painting is the lemon and the copper bucket there. All the people in the painting are friends of Eakins. They're not actually officials at the ring. And many of the people in the background are people that Eakins knew. And the next one. He did a series of 3 of these. That one is called Between Rounds. This one is called Salutat, the Roman gladiator exiting the ring. Again, Eakins' friends of there. The painting is surrounded with this kind of halo, which shouldn't be there. It's due to over-cleaning. In fact, it would be a much more solid background like this. So he doesn't really seem like he's a supernatural being. Okay. And then finally, Eakins, in the mid-1890s, painted a whole series of people who were very close to him, thinking back to the Peel portraits of his family. This is Samuel Murray, who was a student of Eakins, and in later life he was really practically the only really good student that Eakins had. He taught at Moore College for about 30 years, and he was a good sculptor. He made some big public sculpture for Philadelphia, some of which still is there. One sculpture still in Fairmount Park. And he was from an Irish family. Apparently he was very chatty and good company and very athletic. And he became friends with Eakins, and they shared a studio for about 10 years, I think. And as you'll see, well, let's see what the next one is. That's Benjamin Eakins, Eakins' father, in the late portrait. He painted several of his portraits of his father. This one with showing the little chin beard that he had all of his life. And these paintings, as you'll see, are all very serious and kind of probing in the way that Eakins is looking at the people. And that was one aspect of its characters. But then the thing about Eakins in his time is that there are so many photographs. And so, could I have the next? There's Eakins' father and Samuel Murray out bicycle riding with Eakins, and showing, I think, the interest in athletics continued in Eakins' life really into the 90s. And his father, who had really gotten him interested in all kinds of sports, was still up for a ride too. Could I go next? And this is Eakins' father-in-law, William H. McDowell, who has a great face, as you can see, and was a very paintable character, and Eakins painted him several times. This painting, this reproduction, is really one of the most accurate that I can show you in terms of color, and also it gives you some idea of Eakins' brushwork, because what he did was mostly direct painting, in which the painting, each stroke means something in the building up of the figure, and the paintings aren't the pigments aren't so much blended together as standing side by side and resolve into an image. And there he is with his wife. and the next. And Eakins, an old family friend of Eakins, came to live with the Eakinses after Eakins' father died. Mary Adeline Williams. Eakins did two wonderfully detailed and beautifully painted portraits, but also portraits that raise a question. This is the earlier portrait of Eakins, of Addie, all buttoned up and cut out nice. And this is a portrait done 2 years later with Addie in a much more elaborate dress, with a very soulful look on her face. And the question is, why did she look this way? What accounted for the change? No one has ever had a real answer. Okay. And there she is with Eakins at the very end of his life. He was, a few years before he died, he had really trouble with his eyesight, and he had some sort of mysterious illness that they could never quite discover. This is the doorway of the garden that Eakins was standing in when he had that painting, his rough portrait done by Susan Riddell years ago. Next. This is Susan. Again, a very intense picture. And it's very hard to explain her expression. And I'm sure everyone here would have a different interpretation of her face. But also, could I have the photograph? There are photographs. There she is with the young, maybe that was the young Harry, in the Eakins side yard. And then there's this one, which is her with cats, and again in the side yard. And you can't see it very well, but she's actually smiling, so grinning. But the point is that there are so many sides to this culture and to Eakins' life that he sees only one part of in his portraits. And this is Eakins' self-portrait done in 1903 for the National Academy of Design. He had been snubbed by the National Academy of Design for many years, and in 1903 they made him an associate and a full member in the same year. And each Academy member was required to present a portrait of themselves for the Academy's collection. And again, I think knowing the circumstances, I tend to read accusation in that portrait. But it's just an absolutely a perfect example of Eakins' painting style. And I couldn't find any good photographs of Eakins in later life. He got kind of chubby. And in 1908, he started painting again a series of the William Rush paintings that he did back in the 1870s. And you can see, if you remember that painting, he has gotten a different model. This one is a very skinny model. In the background, you can see maybe more of Rush's sculpture than there were before. There's a figure of the Schuylkill River that's here, that's on the waterworks. There's Eakins himself, or not Eakins, but there's this Rush himself, all sorts of things on the wall. And then he used a black model for the chaperone, which is an entirely different conception of the painting. Next, please.
Do you want to see this one close up?
Oh, I don't know. Let's do.
I can, but.
Let's do. Oh, sorry. it's a study, but you can see it's also a kind of, it has a mood to it. Eakins always didn't just paint a subject, he kind of conveyed part of his emotional response to it. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, good luck. Oh, you have to, that's right, you have to go back.
Oh. Sorry, guys. That's not supposed to happen.
Well, we can have a brisk rehash, or, which is right, don't make it too brisk.
Okay.
Yeah, just keep going. Good, good.
No, not one.
Stop. Well, I'm trying to think of the things I haven't said. One of the things is that the Eakinses apparently had a very happy marriage. They were both devoted to each other. And Susan really shared all of Eakins' ideas about painting and art in general. And then to go back, to finish up with this painting, as I said, Eakins returned to this theme very late in his life, in 1908. He died in 1916. And after about 1910, he had enough physical problems that he pretty much stopped making art. Next please. So I'm ending with this painting, which is another interpretation of the William Rush theme. Eakins never finished a complete painting with this in these late series, but it seems to me a kind of final statement of Eakins by Eakins about his devotion to the nude figure. The figure on the sculpture is actually a self-portrait by Eakins, helping this demure model down from the posing stand. And I think of it as symbolic of Eakins really giving up the subject, which is probably not true, maybe just my interpretation, but I think it's a good slide to end this lecture on. Thanks. Delivering floaters in my eye during much of
Oh,
the.
that's terrific.
Yeah. Oh, questions? Sure.
Okay.
Lots of questions.
Oh, wow.
Most of the paintings you showed us, I didn't see his signature on. Only 2 or 3 of them had his signature. Is that significant?
No, he just didn't sign a lot of his paintings. And he also didn't sell them. So maybe he's one of those artists who would sign the painting after it was sold or, going to be sold.
Darrel,
Oops, sorry.
It's,
Oh, I see Barbara.
thank you so much. That was very interesting and informative. And I'm glad you ended with that last nude portrait, because many years ago I was doing some studying of Eakins and came across a very interesting moment in his life and you referenced his being fired by the Academy. This was when he was painting females in his studio at home. And he was caught doing it, and there's a wonderful picture of a woman that he is painting, and I don't know what the time frame is, but it was just a very interesting moment in his life when he got into trouble again by painting women before they were doing that. So thank you again.
Oh, well, he did paint women in his studio. He painted mostly models, not necessarily students. And artists painted nude women all the time. So I don't think that was the scandalous part of Eakins' life. It was just the mix of nude men and women students.
Do I gather that Susan McDowell, his wife, was an artist all of her life also?
She was. She was actually a talented artist.
Is there interest in her collection?
She was a student at the Pennsylvania Academy, and she won some prizes as a student there for her art. She didn't stop painting when she married Eakins, but she slowed down a lot because there was a lot to do running the household. Eakins' father always lived with them. But she did paint occasionally when she could. And Eakins, while Eakins went out to the West, she painted, and they were sending comments about painting back and forth. And then after he died, she painted much more, and painted a very good portrait of him from a photograph. There has been a show of her work. There have been a couple, one at the Academy, and there probably is a catalog from that.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear that she got some attention.
I was struck by the portrait of Walt Whitman, not the photograph, but the portrait, and I'm a little confused or curious about his costume. The collar looked almost Dutch somehow.
Oh, you're talking about the photograph?
No, I'm talking about the painting.
Oh, let's see.
And I just wondered if that was an affectation or is it?
Oh yeah, well look at his color. It has a little edging of lace around
Yes,
it.
right.
And that may have just been Whitman.
It looked out of time to me.
Yes, but I don't think it's a real reference to another style of painting.
Gordon, go ahead. Did you want to go?
I'm just holding the mic.
Okay. Okay.
Start. Okay. The subject of portraiture, I've walked past. I've walked past portraits in museums my whole life because I didn't really know who the people were. Eakins has changed my entire approach to portraits. And I wondered who the market is. Who was the market for all his portraits? Because you was, earlier in the lecture you said they weren't selling, but then you showed, then obviously they are selling, so are they made for?
Well, thank you for that question. In fact, Eakins didn't sell his portraits, but his reputation and his fame as an artist and admiration for him grew really from the early 1890s, when he had 10 paintings in the World Columbian exhibition, one of the, I think, 5 Americans who had that many paintings. And as the mood of the United States became more nationalistic, Eakins became more admired for his individualism and his, as the critic said in his dedication to Eakins, no pretense or crankiness. He was, in other words, a straightforward, admirable American person. French art really was no longer admired, And there was a real movement to get American artists to paint American subjects. So, and after Eakins died, the Metropolitan Museum gave him a full-scale exhibition. And then the Pennsylvania Museum of Art had the same exhibition. And Eakins was admired for in a sense, the mood of his paintings, but also for the beauty of his painting technique. And that after the First World War was when the audience for his painting and the purchasing of his painting grew and grew. And Susan Eakins did a lot to promote his art after he died. But there were still, when she died in 1938, a lot of Eakins pictures in his studio that were bought at very reasonable prices by museums and private collectors.
So I have a personal connection to the artist.
Right. Thank you, George.
It's because he painted my great-grandmother, Frances Corson Day, and the same thing that happened with her that happened with others. She did not like the portrait, so she didn't accept it. Went into his private collection, and eventually, following his death, it sort of bounced around a little and then found its way to the Hirshhorn Museum, where my great-aunt located it some years ago and arranged with the curator to have it photographed. She took the photographs, made prints of them, and distributed them to her nieces and nephews. So we have a copy. It's hanging in our apartment, and it's kind of fun to have it around.
I've seen it, and it's really a nice picture, but like many of Eakins' portraits, not just women, but men too, the sitter didn't like it at all and gave it back to Eakins.
So Darrel, he didn't sell these paintings. What were they living on?
Well, he did, he occasionally sold one, and there were some commissions, like the Agnew Clinic, the Gross Clinic earlier on. His father was a writing master, I think, as I said. Jim Davis told me that he taught writing penmanship at Friends Central, right, for 50 years. And he was also very clever about real estate investment. So he left Eakins enough money to live on, not extravagantly, and he did have to sell painting, but he always had that little cushion of money to depend on. Yeah.
Is Eakins buried in Philadelphia?
Yes, he's in Woodland Cemetery, I think. He and Susan both.
Any last question?
Oh, Susan.
In the Gross Clinic, you showed a picture, the close-up of the hand also revealed a cringing female figure in the background. I had never noticed that. And I wonder, is there a message? Is she trying to tell us, this is so horrible, I can't stand it?
Well, I think that's part of it. It's a shock to her and horrible, because the law was there had to be someone there to be a witness to the surgery besides the doctors. And so she could be his mother or some other female.
Oh, that's a horrible thing.
Right.
All right, well, I think we're done then, and big thanks to Darrel. This is fantastic.